other times of the year, we hear very often from Isaiah. And I hope that if you haven't ever studied the book, that one thing you'll maybe keep in your mind is to ask when you hear, oh, we are reading from Isaiah. Okay, which part of Isaiah are we hearing from today? And where does that put us in the history, a very important period of time in Israel's history? And hopefully by the end of this, you may have a sense of what I just said. Lots of times when we hear from Isaiah, the words are very familiar to us, thanks to a certain composer who wrote an oratorio called The Messiah. And he used many portions of the book of Isaiah in telling his story. So we're used to hearing from Isaiah and interpreting it as if it really was written as a prophecy about the coming of Jesus. And if we can, when we're studying it, try to keep in mind that that was not the reason Isaiah wrote his book. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go on. What he's talking about is a period of time when the original audience for which he wrote were Jews who were going through a time of overwhelming tragedy and destruction. The Messiah that Isaiah hoped for was going to be someone who would help Jerusalem regain its former glory. And that was the purpose of the Messiah, to help Jerusalem be the way it was when they had another great king, David or Solomon. The period of time that it covers in its 66 chapters spans 3 centuries. So obviously it was not written by the same person. Any questions about that, we'll go back later. But Isaiah himself did write a part of the book, especially the first part. And interestingly, in 1946, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, one of the most important scrolls they found was the scroll of Isaiah. And it dated from 150 BC. And that scroll of Isaiah is the same text as has been in Hebrew Bibles ever since. So I think it was a great authentication that all the editing had been done, and by 150 BCE, it was as it is today. But there was a tremendous amount of additions and editing that went on in the centuries in between. So in order to understand the sweep of history that the book covers, we have to do a little background work, and it will help if you look at the timeline that's on the handout. We have to start with 1000 BCE. I'm not quite used to saying BCE, that's been the proper way to say BC for a long time. But it starts about 1000 BCE, and the history that the book covers ends about 500 years later. So we read this book, and the history is just amazing sweet. There were 3 empires that took control of the area that we call the Holy Land during the time of the book of Isaiah. First were the Assyrians. You see that 722 BC. The Assyrians, a very powerful empire, took over the whole of what was the Holy Land, and in their period of time, they destroyed. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. After David's reign, came the time of, well, which was from 1000 to 970 BCE, and his son Solomon took over from him from 970 to 931. This is when things start getting interesting, because after the death of Solomon, they couldn't decide who was going to be, which of his sons was going to be king. So they split the country in two. And they had the northern part and the southern part. So if you turn the page and look at the map, you'll see where it says Israel. Okay, that's the northern kingdom. And the southern kingdom is only the smaller part of the two parts called Judah. And in the kingdom of Judah, which is where Isaiah lived, and there is Jerusalem, its capital. You see that right up here? And then Israel took as its capital Samaria. So Samaria. Now, when the Assyrians came in, they totally destroyed the north. People were either killed or exiled, or there was no more king of Israel. There was no more of anything that they would recognize as their country. So all was left was Judah toward the bottom. Okay, so after Assyria, and Jerusalem barely escaped being totally destroyed by Assyria, but it did escape. And so this is the time after the north was destroyed by Assyria. The second, we have a lapse of 135 years. So the first part of Isaiah goes from chapters 1 to 39, and that's the period of time when the north has been invaded and is destroyed. That's, if you look at on the other side of the timeline again, you see it says Isaiah writes from 742 to 701. So that includes the whole period of time when the Assyrians destroyed and annexed the north, but they do not invade Jerusalem. So that's at the end of Isaiah's, the person Isaiah's writing. So then we have this, we get to the end of chapter 39, and we have this like pause of 135 years. And the story continues then, and Babylon has overtaken Assyria. So the second wave happens, and this time the Babylonians do capture and destroy Jerusalem and the temple and all the way of life, and take all the leading citizens of Jerusalem off to exile in Babylon, the Babylonian captivity, we call it. And this is when the second part of Isaiah is written. So chapters 40 to 55 tell the story of the exile of the people of Jerusalem. They were in exile for about 50 years, and then the third kingdom takes over. It's the Persians. And the Persians have a king named Cyrus. And Cyrus says to these people who were captive, I think you all should go home. So they were released from captivity. And that's when they were about to be released, that's what the story of the third part of Isaiah tells. That wonderful part that starts from chapter 55 to 66. So do you get some idea of that sweep of history? Now, the interesting thing is that along the way, it wasn't just, here's the first 39 chapters. Let's add to it the next half, 40 to 55. And then we got the third part, 55 to 66. As if they were all just three books all put together. That's not the way it goes. You have editing going on all the way through it. So you've got some of the words of Isaiah that are appearing in all three sections. But the main part of Isaiah's story is the first part. So editors put this book together sometime after the exiles returned to Jerusalem and the time when they found the Dead Sea Scroll. But when did the editing finish? I don't really think we know. So any questions about this part of the story? Is that kind of, so when you hear somebody say today's reading is from the 40th chapter of Isaiah, okay, that's after the north that's been conquered and Jerusalem's about to get it. If it's chapter 2, well, you know it's when things are really starting to get rough, and things are not so good. We tend to know the parts of Isaiah. The parts of Isaiah that we hear in church are usually the nice parts that Isaiah or somebody else wrote that are so beautiful. I know that my Redeemer liveth. All beautiful passages. But in between all those are some pretty rough things that he describes about what's really going on in the land and to the people. Okay. If you look at the first paragraph of the handout, where it says 3 Isaiahs. The book in our Bible called Isaiah was written by one person over a pivotal and terrible time in Israel's history. Much of what is now our Old Testament was written or put into its current form around this time. So a lot of Israel's history took place then. Let's see where I'm on here. Their prophets who were writing at the time of the invasion of the Assyrians, warning the northern kingdom to get its act together, are Elijah, Amos, Hosea, and from the southern kingdom, Isaiah and Micah. All those parts of the Bible come from this part of history, this time scheme when so much is going wrong. And prophets were not so much telling the future, magically telling the future, they're saying to Israel and to Judah, if you keep living the way you're living, things are going to go badly for you. And that's what it was all about. Prophets warning in the northern kingdom to get its act together before it was too late. Elijah, Moses, Hosea, Amos, and Hosea. And I think that's it. So what was going wrong? Isaiah's point was the people of God have lost their way, and they are no longer we're practicing the basic requirements that God has set for them, which are to be concerned with justice and righteousness. And you'll hear that in some of the readings as we do today and next week even more. The ancient Jewish prophets really believed that there would be consequences for the people if they neglected their call to be a people of justice and righteousness. Now, the interesting thing I want us to think about, and maybe hopefully we can talk about this, hear what you think. Do we believe the way the prophets believed, that God really cares about the way our society is living? Or is it all, I mean, I think if you read a secular history of this period of time, of those three empires that took over Israel and Judah, it would just be Israel and Judah are small little nothing countries, and these big powerful empires just took them over. Well, the way the prophets tell it, God let those other countries take over because the people of God are not acting the way I want the people of God to act. That is, with mercy and compassion on each other, caring for the widow and the orphan, caring about the poor, all this kind of thing. Do we really believe in God that way? Do we think that there is a consequence from God to anything that happens? And it's an interesting thing to think about when you think about our society today. Does it not make any difference to God that hundreds of thousands of people are homeless every night on our streets? That there are poor everywhere in the world? That the people of Gaza and Israel are in such damaging times right now because of all the historical stuff that's going on? That the people of Ukraine and Russia, you can go on and on and on. Does it make any difference? Will there be any consequences? So the prophets, the Jewish prophets, so much of our Hebrew scriptures really believe that if the people forget or neglect their call to be a righteous people who love the Lord their God with all their heart and their neighbors as themselves, it has the consequence. Interesting thing to think about it. So let's take a quick look at those three sections, just to do a brief thing so you can get a sense of the way it reads. Isaiah 1, so which is the first part of the book, Isaiah writes, how the faithful city, Jerusalem, his beloved Jerusalem, how the faithful city has become a whore. She that was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not defend the orphan, and the widow's cause does not come before them. Therefore, says the sovereign, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will pour out my wrath on my enemies and avenge myself on my foes. That's just a little taste of the first chapter of Isaiah. Really hearing these lovely melodies from the Messiah. He was really angry. So then part 2, when Jerusalem has been conquered and the people are being taken into captivity, after Jerusalem has been leveled, and the writer writes these beautiful words, comfort, oh comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term. Her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. And then the third part with the promise of the return to Jerusalem. Isaiah does not end with a promise to return. Ezra and Nehemiah are the books that talk about life after the return. But part 3 with the promise, be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For I am about to create Jerusalem as a joy and its people as a delight. You see the difference between that and the first chapter where he called Jerusalem a whore. Now this promise of return. So the book of Isaiah takes us through history from its catastrophic demise to its anticipated restoration. All at the behest of Yahweh. The book of Isaiah, when it talks about the Assyrians or the Babylonians taking over, it's as if God wanted them to do that because the people needed to be punished. They needed to be change their ways. And then when he talks about Cyrus, from the Persians who took pity on the Jewish people in captivity and sent them back, it was as if God directed Cyrus to do that, to let them go back to Jerusalem. So we'll look more detail next week at the 3 parts. But I want to read to you another piece of scripture that comes from the period of exile. It really was only about 50 years, but it was a tremendously important 50 years. And you probably know this song. It's 137, and I think it's just so poignant the way it talks about the emotions of the people who are in captivity. If you've got a prayer book, you can look it up. It's on 792. By the waters of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered you, O Zion. Zion, of course, is another name for Jerusalem. By the waters of Babylon, what would that be? The Tigris or the Euphrates, one of those rivers? By the waters of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered you, O Zion. As for our harps, we hung them up on the trees in the midst of that land. For those who led us away captive asked us for our song, and our oppressors called for mirth. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song upon an alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. And then the last 3 verses, the prayer book leaves a little space there in case you want to not read those because they're a little rough. Remember the day of Jerusalem, O Lord, against the people of Edom, who said, down with it even to the ground. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction. Happy the one who pays you back for what you have done to us. Happy shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. I remember singing that in seminary and singing, happy are they who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. Glory be to the Father. But you can hear the tragedy and the distress in that, the anguish. So that's a song from that same period of time as Isaiah was writing of the people in exile. So what questions do you have, and where does your understanding of God fit in this? As I said, the prophets believe God is behind all the acts of history. Is God still involved in our history, or do you see, how do you see that? Susan?
Well, I think it's impossible, and it's probably looking at this now.
I mean, let me get it right, because I think it's impossible. You're.
I can.
It's for the morning.
Maybe it's still not this. Thanks.
I'm thinking that the overall thing, of what's going on now in this world, is God's looking at us and thinking, are you kidding me? I mean, are they ever going to learn? But at the same point, I truly think God doesn't make things happen like this choice. And what we do is it is part of why we say lift up our hearts, because of his overseeing. I don't think judgment happens until we die and look at him face to face and say, well, you tried. Or hanging in there. But right now, I'm just still a frustration, but I don't think he's making these things happen. And there's too many different opinions about how life should be now. That's the scary part. So who's praying and who's not?
What's your, so I think, yeah, it really forces us to think of our whole concept of God. You know, where is God, and how does God act? And I think God is right here in the midst of each one of us. But I've been too influenced by Julian of Norwich that you know, God is just, yeah, you mess it up a lot, but God's still gonna love you. And I think that concept of God's love is but is there any reason with what we know about God and God's call for justice and mercy, which I think goes all through history, and at our best we try to live that out. But in our society, what is the possible reason that we have hundreds of thousands of people who are so poor, who have no place to live, all those things? And you know we can do it. You know we can solve the problems if our hearts were there. So how do we get our concepts of loving God into action, justice and mercy, which Isaiah knew was what God wanted more than anything. You understand?
What a surprise.
I think one of the things that always bothered me about Isaiah is that, and God is in a certain place.
Yeah.
That to me is not true, because wherever God is, and if we look around this room, we go to church, like that, and we tend to put God in there, but first, God is, period.
Yeah.
Period. And so that concept of just having God in one spot is bothersome to me, because God should be wherever you are. That's where God is, if you think you are.
I think that's one of the things you have to just accept about the prophets, that they were dealing at a certain time in history, and I think that concept of God in the Hebrew scriptures at some point it's like this is our God, and then eventually the concept of God is expanded until I think today, not all of us would be willing to say, well, we have the real God and nobody else knows anything about the real God. That we have, as if that we have a corner on that. And I think the side thing, I agree with you, that's not, God is not, planked down and with one set of really people he really likes and. But how about the rest of you? What do you think? What do you think?
I repeat the question. What do I?
Yeah, God's place in the history of human history. I think it's discouraging looking at it. Yeah, but are you waiting somebody?
Yeah, someone on the phone, she's gonna unmute them.
Donna?
Yeah, thanks. So a question came up a few minutes ago, what about all those who are starving and homeless in our society? Does their circumstance reflect the wrath of God? And I'm not seeing a precise parallel between that question and the question of the conquests over Israel, because if the people of Israel were not living up to the standards of justice for the marginalized in their own society, the judgment came upon those who had power to alleviate suffering. It's not saying that God was punishing those who were widows and orphans in their society. Am I making sense? So
Can you just say it one other time? Could you say it one more time? You're talking about the people of Israel today?
no. So anyway, we're kicking around how much God intervenes as a consequence for shortcoming with regards to justice. And so I think we have to include perhaps a conversation about sin and the suffering that humans cause to one another. So yeah, I think it's dicey. Like how much does God step in when things are getting out of hand? I appreciate the question. I just wanted to jump in with the idea that, suffering does not equal punishment.
Suffering, not equal punishment, yeah, okay.
Can you hear me if I just speak from here? I will propel my voice forward. It's interesting because this morning, I'm sorry, I'm reading this. I was reading this morning one of the readings I did from Fleming Rutledge during this time, and she had posed in this series of readings the effects of what happens when we put on others evil, and we sort of totalitize it, if I can put it that way. And in the midst of all this was a remarkable quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, all of us Christian people know, and some young people may not have heard of, who wrote and spoke from the gulags in Russia. And he again espoused what we know to be true, and that is the wolf, the sin within us all. We are both capable of the great good, and we are both capable of the great evil. And that, in a sense, is what Lent is about, because these are the Lenten readings she has. And that is to put us back into the framework of where, oh God, have I sinned? How am I permitting what happens? How am I needing to look at myself? Then the other thing that I was thinking about as you were speaking, in relationship to who God is we have to be very careful, I believe, in not making God fit our ideas of what we would prefer God to be. And then I'm going to address judgment to that very briefly. That is, generally speaking, we pray for judgment on so and so, this subject. Don't bother. We're all going to be judged. Okay, prayer for mercy. That's the thing that I believe I need to pray for, because I know, I don't know who said this, judgment is something that we'll deserve and we're going to get, and we treat to have. But mercy is something we all want, we deserve. So I heard that somewhere, and I thought it was pretty good. But I think that idea, who is God, should not resemble times of living and our preferences. And it is difficult, those passages that we have just read in the Psalm are difficult. Because we like to think of God as the greatest democracy. But he isn't. He's going to come and rule.
Yes.
You know, that's a troubling thing for many of us today.
And also you have that comment, you know, in Galatians or whatever chapter that you read, what you said. And so their thing was, okay, their sense of, you know, can bring about exactly, you know, that sense of the karmic activity that if you were Buddhist, then you would definitely think there's that particular, you read what you said.
I'm not sure if we answered the question from the online, but clearly, everything that happens to us is not because we did something. I mean, we really believe that. But I think the overwhelming idea of the prophets of old was that is that you could see God acting through history. I think Isaiah certainly thought that the things that were happening were not just because of stronger country, but you know, so who knows what can we do on our own to make this a better place? Live lives of justice and mercy. What other thoughts?
You will have joy.
Yeah,
Our cultivated love, our response to the God that's present in every children.
yeah, and what's the interesting thing when I find reading the book of Isaiah, have any of you ever sat down and read, I mean, don't, you know, some of them, read through the book? It's a complicated book. You know, you'll have a passage where a period of verses where this anger of God is just coming out like fire, and then a beautiful passage of comfort and love, and it goes back and forth like that. Some scholars think that in some of those middle sections of Isaiah that you've got a lot of it's written like poetry. And you can, if you look at your text, you'll see it, a lot of it's written like poetry. And then you'll have commentary that's more just straight prose. And some people think that some of the poetry, much of the poetry may have been the original words of the prophets. And some of the prose may have been sermons that were given, or explanations that were given by other rabbis or other people. I don't think we really know that, but that's but reading it, you're going through back and forth all these things. It's not easy. Did you find it an easy book to read? Any of you read through it?
If it thinks it's not easy.
It's not easy. It's not easy. It doesn't read like they're reading the script of the Messiah. So that's why I have to be here. Yeah.
Just a quick question for people to consider that. I think one of the problems that we encounter as finite is that things have to be spoken, revealed to us in an order. But God is God all the time. So, I'm going to cite the prayer of humble access. The original one. We do not presume to come to this like, also, Lord, trusting in thy, but in thy great mercy. We are not worthy so much as to gather crumbs, but thou art the same Lord whose property is always to have mercy. For God, that is one entire action. My personal feelings. For us, not so. In a sense, we hear from Isaiah the great power of God. The anger of God, but at the same time, it's the same merciful, loving, and just God.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, it's very difficult, I think, for myself, to try and reconcile this. It's
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think it's,
Thank you.